Well, it's been a long wait, but finally we have a new Star Fox game, Alex.
Yes, it has been a massively long wait, like especially for myself. I've been waiting every single E3 since 2007 for a new Star Fox game, and the fact that it's finally here is like that feeling when a sequel that you've always wanted to get made is right here, and it blows your mind even still.
Assault is really like the last Star Fox game in my mind. Yeah, Command came out and there was a 3D remake. They were great. In fact, I love the 3D remake. It's probably maybe my favourite Star Fox game as a whole.
Yeah.
But Assault, even to a lot of people, wasn't a proper Star Fox game. This is the sequel that everyone wanted from Star Fox 64. Like, since 1997, now we're finally getting that game nearly 20 years later. To you, Alex, was it worth the wait?
I'm inclined to agree that it was worth the wait.
I don't. That's not to say I don't like this game. I'll start off by the things that I love about this game. First of all, some people said the graphics, that looks like if you watch this game in motion, 60 frames per second, when it runs at 60, which isn't all the time, but majority of the time when it runs at 60, it looks gorgeous. Like the visuals, how smooth everything looks. It is just a stunning looking game in a lot of ways. However, I do feel like it feels like in a lot of ways like an old game, and it feels like an HD version of a GameCube game, I guess. Like this was the sequel that should have come out on the GameCube to Star Fox 64 that we never got. I think that when we should address the big elephant in the room of the actual controls.
Yes, we will.
Do you like them?
I will say that the controls are nowhere near like unplayable or broken as some make it out to be.
I agree.
The controls are more, I'd say they take steps to comprehend than poor control in general, I'd say. It still felt like a Star Fox game, like what Lilac Wars did. For something that's guilty by some to repeat Lilac Wars or Star Fox 64 all over again, it's a fresh spin, and if they were to make a Star Fox game for the Wii U, it makes sense of why they'd want to make the most out of a unique control scheme such as the gamepad.
Yeah, because otherwise if they start just putting a map like the gamepad screen, everyone's like, what's the point of having the gamepad?
Yeah.
There's no point, like, it's this useless sort of thing. So I like the fact that they made this game from the ground up for the Wii U in mind.
Yeah, exactly. Like, instead of just tacking on Star Fox 64 all over again. Having said that, later on in the game, particularly in the later stages, the controls did slightly irk me in a few areas.
I think we should go into like at least spoiler territory on certain stages, because in there Star Fox, it's not really the Last of Us in terms of storytelling. By the way, spoilers, you fight Andros at the end. No shit.
Exactly, like Star Fox is no The Last of Us in its story, so I'm okay to go into spoilers here.
But then I went around a friend's house, brought the Wii U with me, and we played it in co-op. So we played through the entire game, for me at least, like blind essentially, playing through in co-op, and I will say this, it's a very, very good way to get to grips with the controls, because you're not having to concentrate on about 50 different things at once.
Yes.
And in fact, the one thing I will say, the co-op mode definitely feels like an afterthought in a lot of ways, because when you go to control the R-Wing with the Pro Controller, you are controlling it just like you would in Star Fox 64, where the aim reticle is always center to where you're aiming. And then there's a second person aiming around and shooting. It is so satisfying when you're flying through and you're just focused on avoiding all these lasers and stuff, and then you just see these laser blasts from your ship firing off and just destroying all these other enemy ships, and that's just a really cool feeling, just to get to grips with how this game plays and controls. One of the main points I think this was an afterthought is that every time when you're playing through this game the first time in co-op, it puts you into single player mode all the time, and you have to exit the stage, go back into it in co-op, and I think that is really dumb, and I hope they patch that in, that you don't have to do that. I don't know if anyone else has played this game for the first time in co-op, but I don't know why that's a thing, that you have to exit the stage to then play again in co-op.
Well, that is so counterintuitive. It reminds me of when in Mario Kart 8, when the only way to turn off the motion controls is to press the pause right after you start the race, just to go to regular controls.
I like the motion controls. I tried with the motion controls off briefly just to see what it was like, but I was like, no, I actually do like be able to just move the gamepad to the right to shoot people to the right. My biggest complaint with the way that they do that is that in certain boss sections, mainly the all-range boss sections, the camera will focus on the TV, will focus onto the main boss, and you are locked on. So instead of being like from behind the R-Wing, you are now like, you're from the side or something. And when you're looking at the gamepad and you're looking from like from the cockpit, and then you look up and you just think, okay, I've completely disorientated myself. Where is the R-Wing in terms of like, is it facing which way? And I find that I don't understand that design idea of some bosses you are always locked on. Some modes and some things you can like flick the lock-on button to see where enemies are. Like when you're fighting Starwolf, that's a really cool way to fight them, is that you're zooming off and you think, okay, where are they? Click the trigger. Oh, they're behind me, so I quickly do a little maneuver to go behind. But when you're always focused on the boss, it's just so disorientating. I just feel so disconnected between the gamepad and the TV, and I don't know why they decided to do that.
Yeah, it's just an utter inconsistency when some bosses, the camera's behind the R-ring, just like the good old days, and then sometimes you have to look at the gamepad in order to not disorientate yourself when you fight the boss.
That's even worse in co-op, by the way. You're still in that weird perspective, but you don't have the gamepad to sort of orientate yourself in some way of like where you're facing. As some people might know, I'm a massive fan of Rocket League. You can press a button to swap the camera modes between either focused on the ball or focused behind you like a regular like driving game. I don't know why they didn't do that, where you can toggle on and off a button of focusing on the enemy, the main boss, or just behind the R-wing. I don't know why I didn't do that. When you haven't got the gamepad in co-op because you're playing with the regular Pro Controller, you can't see where you are. I don't know, I really hated that aspect of it, to be honest. It's probably my least favourite part of it.
One way of them being over-reliant on the gamepad is how, when the characters or your teammates are speaking to you as you progress through the stage, they only speak to you through the gamepad and there's no audio from the TV. And
that is odd. Yeah.
And I think it is a big mistake to not have the option. I understand the intention so that it would feel like a voice communicator, like if you pilot an R-ring, and that'd be great, but it'd be even greater to, have the option.
That's the biggest problem I find with this game, is the lack of options.
Yes.
In terms of control in general. Still to this day, I find it really annoying. In most games, you cannot map any button to any other button. I cannot stand the barrel roll being on the right analog stick to flick it.
On the R-ring sections, it's not so bad, but when you're in the walker and when you need to sharply turn to the right, sometimes you'll do a barrel roll by accident. And when I'm trying to get up the platforms on Sector Alpha, then I'm falling off it because I got hover on again.
I don't understand why you can't use the L and R buttons for the barrel roll. It reminds me of playing Ocarina of Time on the GameCube. They literally mapped the C buttons from the N64 controller to the C stick of the GameCube. You just flick it left and right or up. It just doesn't feel natural. And it's exactly the same feeling I have when doing the barrel rolls.
When my sister actually wanted to have a go at Star Fox Zero, because like me, she's a massive fan of the original Lilac Wars, she actually enjoyed it just fine. When I was watching her play through Sector Alpha, particularly the part where you've got to stop the boss in the walker. Now, there were times when she tried to turn sharply to the right, but she accidentally did barrel rolls and she kept falling off. It took about 3 to 4 minutes just to get up the platforms, and it looked like she was playing really bad when it was down to the controls as to why it took her longer than it should.
Totally agree. I really love the way that you can just you can transform into different like modes. Like the Landmaster can like transform into this like weird flying Landmaster version. The R-Wing you can transform into the Walker, and that's a really, I love the way you can easily transform into these different modes. But the problem is that the land-based controls are just garbage. People complain about the controls of Star Fox Assault, and I will admit they're not perfect. Star Fox Assault's controls for the Landmaster and for even the foot sections feel better than Star Fox Zero. I'm probably going to get panned for saying that.
I found Assault so disappointing because it focused way too much on the on-foot sections, and I wouldn't mind it if it controlled good, but it didn't control well, and there was lack of variety in the missions, and rubbed me the wrong way about Assault. And when I play a Zero, I mean, the walker sections aren't perfect, particularly in its barrel roll controls, but I will say this, it didn't feel pace-breaking, nor did it feel like it didn't feel like a chore to get through. And plus, the fact that I could go back into an R-ring at will, makes my experience all the more smoother. On
the subject of vehicles, there's one thing that's been getting a lot of flack from people, and I went into this bit thinking I'm gonna hate this. If I'm not enjoying some of the land-based missions, I'm gonna hate this. Is the gyrocopter. I really enjoyed that stealth mission.
Yeah.
I played that in co-op with my mate Steve, and we both came away saying that was actually really fun, like avoiding the spotlights and having to drop this little robot down in little sections, and I was controlling the robot. And by the way, that robot is the cutest fucking robot I've ever heard. The way he just is so happy about everything he does. He's just like, accessing computer! Like, he's just really happy about it, and it just makes me smile every time. And if Steve's watching this, he's going to roll his his eyes because he got a bit fed up with the fact of how much I fell in love with this little, like, Rob the Robot.
I'd say he's right up there with Chibi Robot as one of the cutest fucking robots I've ever seen in a game.
Yeah, totally. And I just think that mission in general, it was a nice pace breaker. It was just different. As much as I will sort of be a bit annoyed with certain sections of Zero, the entire pacing of the game I think is very, very well done. There are missions that slow things down. They don't feel like they're intentionally like bringing it to a halt. And there's that mission towards the end of the game where you're speeding through like almost like a Death Star sort of part. And that was like really, really cool. I just love the variety of the game, to be honest.
Now, this is why I think what holds Zero up something like Assault, because one thing I didn't like about Assault was that the missions were all 10 missions on a menu, and there's no reason to go back to them other than getting the gold ranking to them, because there's no alternate ways to, get through them as such. It's like you're in the R-Ring 1 mission, 2 to 3 missions, you're on the ground with awkward controls, with the occasional R-Ring section, but you're on the ground most of the time. And then another R-Ring mission for another 2 to 3 on foot missions, and that was such a plodding pace in my eyes. Whereas at Zero, I mean, it slows down with the gyro ring, but it didn't feel padding.
The way that you discover alternate paths is pretty linear compared to 64. And I'm not, maybe that, I mean, some people didn't necessarily like that about 64. I did, in that you have to achieve certain things to get to certain exits. Whereas in this, you play levels and you just go through a different teleporter thing, and I didn't really like that.
Yeah, I actually want to say that although I really do like the pacing of this game, and I do like the replayability, do agree with you that it was a disappointment of how linear the planet seemed, because when I first saw the Lilac map in the trailers and on the promos, I thought we were going to get something like Lilac Wars, where like you start at Corneria, you have an alternate path, then you go to another stage, and the path you take is dependent on how you finish the level, and that gives you a massive motivation, what makes every playthrough of Lilac Wars so refreshing, and that's why I play it like 50 to 100 times. Whereas in Zero, it feels very linear the whole way through. In fact, there's only about 1 or 2 levels where it feels like your actions affect it, because the altered path you take is just there for medal completion.
The way that how linear it is doesn't really help that the game's so short. I think that the biggest counterintuitive thing about it is that it takes quite a number of hours to really nail the controls. And I'm about 10 hours playtime, and I would say at the moment I've just about, I say mastering, like I am getting comfortable with the controls, but at this point there's no real need for me to keep playing this game except for getting medals, and I'm not really that bothered about getting the medals. And I think that that's the biggest problem, is that there's not enough replayability to warrant how steep the control learning curve is. I know that Zero, you can do different, like there are like, I think something like 15 or so different routes to actually get to the end, but they're not really that different.
The only stage where it felt like your choices mattered was that, well, to be honest, it wasn't even a choice, it was more down to beating the boss, but basically it was that if you don't defeat Starwolf in time, Pebby gets stranded on Titania, but if you defeat him in time, you go to Fortuna. I wish the whole game was like that. And another thing that irks me is that the alternate stages you go to, they're very short missions. Starwolf invades a level, you chase Starwolf, the whole mission is literally just defeating Wolf himself, and that's it, and then you go to the next one.
I think for me the biggest thing as well about this game, it feels like it doesn't really belong in 2016. Do you know what I mean? Without sounding like too harsh in the game, I did enjoy my experience, and I probably will play a bit more of it. Unless I'm recording it for footage purposes, I don't know if I'm really going to go back to this game that much. Again, I think the biggest problem is that it feels aged, even though it's only a couple of days old at the point of this recording.
Oh yeah, another thing that did disappoint me was that, to my knowledge, I don't think there was any on-rails bosses in Zero. Like, all the bosses in the game were all range mode.
Now that you mention it, actually, my favourite bosses from 64 were the ones where you're on rails. I loved the dogfighting aspect, like I loved fighting Starwolf. They're like probably my favourite boss battles from 64.
Yeah.
But any boss battle where it was a big ship or something and I had to fly around and shoot certain sections, I always hated that, compared to the linear ones, like where you got the alternate final boss of Corneria on 64, or Andros himself is... I get that they don't want to completely copy that, but I mean, I don't know about you, but I found the Andros final boss fight so infuriating.
When you're trying to attack Andros head on with the Walker, because his movements can be so stiff, and because there's so little rings in the battle, I died at like 3 or 4 times before I finally, got Andros down. I
think, yeah, I died about the same sort of amount. I mean, the biggest problem for me was, again, being disorientated when you leave that section where Andros is in that little cylinder thing. You come out, and all of a sudden, again, the focus is on Andros rather than looking at your your R-Wing, and I'm trying to avoid them lasers going around, and I just, for the life of me, felt so disconnected from what I was doing. I couldn't wrap my head around it. It's probably more my fault than the game, but then the game, I think, again, should give me that option to not be focused on the boss. If I want to lock onto the boss, I'll lock onto the boss. If I don't want to lock onto it, I don't want to lock onto it. The amount of times, especially when you're just got to look at the TV, when you're playing in co-op, for example, and you don't have that option, the camera just freaks out, and you're just like, whoa, hang on, like I don't know what's going on. And now all of a sudden, I'm like facing the O-wings the other way. I really hated that. I mean, I don't know about yourself, but throughout the entire game, I tried to use the gamepad as little as possible. I was trying to aim my stuff using the gamepad by not looking at it. You know, I was looking at the TV as much as I possibly could. The biggest bullshit thing for me about a lot of the boss fights, when you die, you lose your power-up. So they have full health now, but you lost your like double twin laser power thing where like you could, when you fight a boss the first time, you're not used to its attack patterns. So you, like in this game particularly, you will probably die the first time playing it. So when you go to like, okay, let's restart from the boss battle again.
I'd have preferred it if you just kept your blue laser throughout every stage, and it would only go away if you had one of your wings destroyed. If I recall, you don't have your wings destroyed.
So that was one thing I really did appreciate in this game over 64, is that when you hit a wall or something, you don't lose your wing and that. And I really appreciate that that's not a thing. As much as it's cool and...
As much as I love the original Island Wars, when that happened, I always feel annoyed. Like, it's like a killjoy when you play through a campaign. I know in this video, it seems like I've complained a lot about the game. When I said at the start, I thought for the most part it was worth the wait, because this really does feel like the Star Fox game I was waiting for since Lilac Wars. I've had more fun with Zero than I did with Adventures, Assault, and Command. I will say that.
I will agree with you on the last one, but the first two, I'm... Oh, this could be a whole other video that we end up talking about the Star Fox as a series. In fact, we might do it one day. But for me, overall, I enjoyed Adventures and Assault more than I enjoyed Zero. Having said that, I'm only 10 hours playtime of Zero, but I've got to that point where I think I'm kind of done with it. I've played through each level twice. In some cases, actually more than twice. Canary, I've probably played more like 10, I think, at this point, actually. Overall, I have enjoyed Zero. But in a lot of ways, I do feel somewhat disappointed with it. I still think it's a good game.
I remember playing Assault like 2 to 3 times, like throughout the years, and every time I was thinking to myself, what is it about this game I'm not seeing? And I really tried hard to love it. I still enjoyed Adventures, but when I replayed it like 10 times since 2002, I still feel annoyed in some parts. Like, some parts feel like a slog to get through.
To me, I love Adventures, but Adventures is definitely a poor man's Zelda. Okay, Alex, for the 10 hours, I enjoyed about... I really enjoyed about 3 or 4 of them.
Oh, yeah?
But the other 6 or 7 was pure frustration, which I've never really had with a Star Fox game except for Command, which again is a whole other subject, but I hate Command with a passion. I actually hate Command, whereas at least with Zero, I just took a while to grow to love it.
But in short, Star Fox Zero is, is a solid game on the Wii U, and I'm so glad it's the Star Fox game I was waiting for, and I still am unlocking all those medals, so that's my solid recommendation.
Awesome.